My name is Maya Callahan. I'm 31 years old, and on the night my younger sister got engaged, my father stood up at the dinner table, raised his glass, and told 22 relatives that the restaurant would not be where it is today without my brother's leadership and my mother's vision. He paused there, looked right past me, and sat back down. I had spent the last 4 years running the financial backbone of that restaurant. I was sitting 6 feet away. Nobody said a word, neither did I. But something shifted in me that night, quiet and permanent, the way a foundation cracks before anyone sees the wall move. The restaurant is called Callahan's Table. It has been in our family for 19 years. My parents opened it in a mid-sized town in Ohio when I was 12, and for most of my childhood it was just the place that smelled like garlic and kept my parents away on weekends. I grew up watching my father work the room, shaking hands, remembering names, telling the same 4 stories to different tables every Friday night. My mother developed the menu, trained the kitchen staff, and made the dining room feel like somewhere worth coming back to. My brother Derek managed the front of house from the time he was 22 and treated it like a personal stage. He was good at the visible parts, the parts people noticed and complimented and photographed for the local paper. I was the one nobody photographed. I work as a freelance financial controller for small and mid-size hospitality businesses. That means I handle bookkeeping, payroll processing, tax compliance, vendor contract review, cash flow forecasting, and the part of every business that nobody wants to think about until something breaks. I picked up Callahan's Table as an account 4 years ago when my parents' previous bookkeeper retired and my mother called me in a panic 2 days before quarterly taxes were due. I cleared the deadline, found 3 years of misclassified deductions they had been leaving on the table, and restructured their payroll system so they stopped paying 2 employees through the wrong tax category. That fix alone saved them over $11,000 in a single filing year. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Family emergency, 1 quarter, just until they found someone. 4 years later, I was still their unpaid financial controller, still filing their quarterlies, still catching the errors their part-time bookkeeper created faster than she could fix them, still fielding calls from their vendor rep about overdue COIs and late payment terms. I wasn't on salary, I wasn't on retainer. I was on family obligation, which, as anyone who has tried to collect on that currency will tell you, pays nothing and costs everything. My brother Derek had the title of general manager printed on business cards. My mother was listed as co-owner and creative director on the restaurant's social media bio. My father's name was on the sign outside. My name appeared nowhere, except on the inside of every form, every filing, every compliance document that kept the place legally operational. So when my father gave his engagement toast that night, and credited everyone in the building except me, it shouldn't have landed the way it did. I had been invisible in that family for years. But there is a difference between being overlooked quietly and being erased publicly, and that toast crossed the line in a way I could not step back over. My cousin Rachel noticed. She was sitting 2 seats down from me, and when my father finished and the table applauded, she leaned over and said, "Just loud enough for me to hear. That was not okay." I told her I was fine. She looked at me the way people look at someone who is clearly not fine but has been saying they are for so long that both of you have gotten tired of the argument. I drove home that night and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my laptop, not because I was planning anything, but because sitting still felt impossible, and opening a spreadsheet has always been the closest thing I have to meditating. I pulled up the Callahan's Table file folder out of habit, and I started reading through it the way you read through something you thought you knew, and suddenly see differently. What I saw was 4 years of work that had no name on it. Or rather, it had my name on it everywhere: my signature on the tax filings, my login credentials on the payroll platform, my email address on every vendor insurance certificate request, my personal accounting software license running the reconciliation system my mother called the computer thing Derek set up. Derek had not set it up. Derek could not have set it up. Derek once asked me what a W-9 was. I am not a dramatic person. My job requires the opposite of drama. It requires patience, precision, and the ability to sit inside a spreadsheet for 4 hours without losing your mind. But sitting at that table, I let myself ask the question I had been professionally avoiding for 4 years. If I stopped, what would actually happen? The answer was not comfortable, and it was not quick in coming, because the honest version required me to stop softening it. The quarterly federal tax filing was due in 6 weeks. The restaurant had 3 large private events booked over the next 2 months, each requiring updated vendor certificates of insurance and event liability riders before the venue could legally host them. The payroll platform auto-renewal was coming up under my personal login, and my email was still listed as the administrative contact for the state food service compliance portal, which sent deadline reminders that I had been forwarding to my mother for 2 years. There was also an outstanding audit flag from the previous year's return that required a response letter, which I had drafted but not yet submitted, waiting on one document from my mother that she had not sent me, despite 3 requests. I was not sitting inside a business. I was sitting inside a system I had built and maintained, and kept breathing, for people who did not know I was there. I called Rachel the next morning. She picked up on the second ring, which is one of the things I love about her. I told her what I had been turning over since the dinner. She listened without interrupting, which is rare and valuable. When I finished, she asked the same kind of question that cuts through everything. She said, "What exactly does your family think you do for them?" I sat with that, because the truthful answer was that I was not sure they thought I did anything. I had been so efficient, so frictionless, so reliably in the background, that my contribution had become indistinguishable from the natural order of things, like electricity. Nobody thinks about electricity until it goes out. I did not make a decision that morning. I made a document. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it simply, Transition File. I started building what any responsible financial controller would build when leaving a client a complete handoff package. Every platform login that needed to be transferred. Every filing deadline on the calendar for the next 12 months. Every vendor contact with renewal dates. Every open item that still needed action before I could walk away cleanly. I did not do this in anger. I did it the way I do all my work, methodically, completely, and without leaving loose ends that would hurt the people who worked in that building, and had nothing to do with my family's choices. The file got very long, very fast. 2 days after the engagement dinner, my mother called to ask if I had seen the vendor certificate for the June private event. I had. I told her it was in the shared drive under Events, subfolder June, exactly where I had put it. She said she could not find the shared drive. I told her how to find it. She asked if I could just forward it. I forwarded it. Then I opened my transition file and added one line, Shared drive access training required for ownership. That same week, Derek texted to ask whether he should accept a new vendor's payment terms. I told him I would review the contract and get back to him. I reviewed it, found 2 clauses that would have locked them into a net 90 payment cycle on a high-volume perishable supplier, which would have been a cash flow disaster, and sent back a summary with recommended counter terms. He replied, "Great, thanks." No question about how I knew that. No curiosity about what the clauses meant. Just an assumption that the answer would arrive and someone else had provided it. I kept building the transition file. By the end of that week, the document was 43 pages. It included every active account with login credentials or contact information, every recurring deadline for the next fiscal year, every open compliance item, and the specific form or agency responsible, a narrative explanation of the payroll system setup with screenshots, and a section I titled Urgent Items, listing 6 things that needed to happen within 30 days for the business to stay current with its obligations. One of those items was the audit response letter. Another was the payroll platform renewal, which I had already decided I would not be renewing under my own login. I did not send the document yet. I sat with it for another week, because I am not impulsive, and because I wanted to be sure I was doing the right thing for the right reasons. I talked to Rachel twice. I took long walks. I thought about the engagement dinner and the toast, and every other dinner before it where my father had described his restaurant's success to someone new, while I sat quietly and let him. I thought about the time my mother introduced me to her friend at a Chamber of Commerce event and said, "This is my daughter Maya. She helps us with some paperwork." Paperwork. I had just spent 11 days preparing their annual tax return, catching a depreciation error that would have triggered a penalty, and negotiating an installment plan on a prior year balance. Paperwork. I thought about every time someone said Derek really has a gift for this business, and I smiled and agreed, because his gift for hospitality was genuine, and because pointing out that the business would have been audited into closure without me felt like the wrong kind of truth to say out loud. I sent the transition file on a Tuesday morning. Clean subject line, Callahan's table financial transition, and handoff documentation. I addressed it to my parents, Derek, and their part-time bookkeeper, Sandra. I wrote 3 sentences in the body of the email. I said that effective at the end of the current month, I would be withdrawing from all financial management responsibilities for Callahan's table. I said the attached document contained everything required to continue operations without interruption, including all platforms, deadlines, and open items. I said that any platform currently billed to my personal accounts would be transitioned before the end date, and that the details were on page 7. I did not mention the toast. I did not mention 4 years of unpaid work. I did not write anything I would be embarrassed to read in front of a room full of people, because I had learned from every exit I had ever managed professionally that the cleanest ones contain facts, not feelings. My phone rang 40 minutes later. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She said she did not understand what the email meant and that I should call her back. Her voice had the particular tone she used when she was managing her own alarm by performing calm. Derek called 20 minutes after that. I let it go to voicemail also. He said, "Maya, what is this?" Not a question. A statement made in the shape of a question. He said I was being dramatic, and that whatever was going on we could talk about it without the formal email thing. He used the phrase "the formal email thing" twice, which told me he had read the subject line and maybe the first paragraph and stopped there, because if he had read further he would have understood that there was nothing dramatic about it. It was a checklist. My father did not call that day. He texted one line that evening. "This isn't necessary." I read it twice, then opened the transition file, and kept working through my list. The payroll platform renewal was the first real moment of consequence. The auto-renew date arrived, and I had already contacted the platform to transfer the administrative account to Sandra and flag my billing information for removal. Sandra called me that afternoon, genuinely confused, and said the system was sending her verification prompts she did not understand, and that my mother had told her to reach out to me. I walked Sandra through the verification process, because Sandra was not the problem. Sandra was a 60-year-old woman who had been doing basic bookkeeping for 20 years and had no idea she was being asked to manage a system 3 levels above her training. I told her calmly what each prompt meant and what to click. Then I added a note to the transition file. Sandra will need platform training. Recommend hiring a qualified controller or engaging a bookkeeping service. The audit response letter was more pressing. The deadline to submit was now 11 days out. I had the letter written. I had been waiting for 2 months for my mother to send me the supporting document, which was a receipt for a piece of commercial kitchen equipment that had been claimed as a capital expense. I sent her one more email with the specific document description, the deadline date, and a note that if the response was not filed on time, the flag would escalate to a formal notice and potentially trigger a broader review. She sent me back a photo of the wrong receipt. I replied, identified what was wrong, and described exactly what I was looking for. She said she would look for it. Then she forwarded the email chain to Derek with the message, "Can you handle this?" Derek forwarded it to me with the message, "Do you need something from Mom?" I stared at my screen for a long moment. Then I replied to Derek with the document description again, and a note that it needed to be found and sent to me within 5 days for me to have enough time to finalize the filing. He said he would look into it. He did not look into it. On the 6th day, Rachel called me. She had been at the engagement dinner, and apparently the email had made its way through the family grapevine, which in our family moves faster than any system I have ever managed. My aunt had called my mother, who had told her version of events. My cousin on my father's side had heard there was some kind of falling out. Rachel had gotten 3 separate calls, asking if I was okay. She told me my father had started telling people I was going through something, that I was burned out and reacting, that it was not a good time to push me. She said this in the flat, reporting tone she used when she wanted me to have the information without editorializing, and I appreciated it. I told her I was not burned out. I was exiting. There was a difference. Burnout is when you have nothing left. What I had was clarity. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your dad told my mom that you handle some of the background admin stuff, and that losing that will be an adjustment, but that Derek and Sandra can pick it up." I almost laughed. Background admin stuff. $11,000 in recovered deductions. 4 years of quarterly filings. An active audit response. Background. On the 8th day, my mother found the receipt. She sent it to Derek, who forwarded it to me at 11 at night with the message, "Here you go. No please, no thank you." No acknowledgement that I had been waiting for 2 months and was now working against a 3-day window. Just here you go, as if the receipt had appeared on its own and been politely delivered. I filed the audit response the next morning. Not because anyone had asked me to stay, because there were employees at that restaurant, kitchen staff, servers, a young hostess who had worked there since high school, and none of them deserved to be collateral in a conflict they had no part in. I completed what I had already started, but I did not take on anything new. The month ended. The transition was official. The first event that tested it was a private birthday dinner for 40 guests, booked 3 weeks later. The host had paid a deposit and expected a licensed bar service to be included. The alcohol endorsement on the venue's liability policy required an updated staffing plan, submitted 30 days before any event over 30 guests. I had been handling that submission automatically for 2 years. Nobody had submitted it this time. The insurer sent a notice to the compliance email address, which was now routed to Sandra, who had no idea what it was or what to do with it. She forwarded it to my mother. My mother called Derek. Derek texted me. He wrote, "There's some insurance thing. Can you take a look?" I replied that the document and instructions for responding to it were on page 19 of the transition file I had sent 30 days earlier, under the section titled Liability Endorsements and Event-Specific Riders. I said if Sandra needed help understanding the process, I was happy to answer one clarifying question, but the submission itself needed to come from ownership. He did not reply for 6 hours. Then he wrote, "We can't find that file. Can you just resend it?" I resent it. The submission went in late. The insurer required a revised event layout before they would reinstate the rider, which meant the 40-person dinner had to reconfigure its bar service at 48 hours' notice. The host was unhappy. She posted about it. Not viciously, but publicly enough that 2 people who had been considering booking the venue for private events quietly went elsewhere. That was the week my father called. Not a text this time, an actual call, at 7 in the evening, which meant he had thought about it long enough to decide a voice was necessary. I answered, because I was not trying to be cruel. I was trying to be done. He opened with logistics. He said the quarterly filing was coming up, and Sandra had found a discrepancy she could not resolve, and that the bookkeeping service they had reached out to wanted 2 weeks just to onboard, which was longer than they had. His voice had a particular quality I had not heard from him before. It was not angry, it was pressured, like a man who has spent a long time assuming that the ceiling would hold and is now standing directly underneath it. I told him the discrepancy Sandra found was almost certainly the depreciation schedule for the refrigeration unit I had restructured 2 years ago. I told him where the supporting documentation was in the shared drive. I told him the name of the form she needed and where to find the instructions. I did not log in and fix it. I gave him the map. That was all I owed anyone at this point. There was a pause. Then he said, "Maya, you have to understand this isn't just about us. There are people who work here. It wouldn't be right to let them get caught in this." I knew he meant it sincerely. I also knew that sentence had been used on me, in various forms, for 4 years, to make sure I never fully stopped. Not maliciously, I didn't think. More like a reflex. The language of family obligation, reaching for me automatically, the way a plant reaches for light. I said, I know. That's why everything they need is documented. The employees will be fine if ownership does the work of reading 43 pages. He did not have an answer for that. After a moment he said, we never meant to take you for granted. I listened to that sentence carefully, not because I disbelieved him, but because I was trying to measure whether it was something he had arrived at himself or something my mother had told him to say on the way to the real ask. He followed it with, we'd like you to come for dinner Saturday. The whole family. We can talk. I said yes. Not because I expected resolution, because I believed him when he said they never meant it. People rarely mean to take things for granted. That does not stop them from doing it. The Saturday dinner was at the restaurant, after close. My parents, Derek, his girlfriend, my sister Jess, and her fiancé, Rachel was not there, but she texted me before I walked in and said, you don't owe them a rescue. You just owe yourself honesty. The table was set nicely. My mother had made my favorite dish, the braised short rib she stopped putting on the menu because it required too much prep time. I recognized it as an effort and let it be one. My father opened the conversation. He said he had spent the past few weeks realizing that he did not fully understand what I contributed to the business and that the transition file had been illuminating. That word, illuminating, sat on the table for a moment. My brother looked at his plate. My mother had the expression of someone who is working very hard to stay composed. My father said that he owed me an apology for the toast at the engagement dinner, that he had been thoughtless, and that he should have acknowledged my role publicly, the same way he acknowledged everyone else's. He said it directly and without hedging, which surprised me enough that I had to look at him carefully to make sure I was hearing it right. I thanked him for saying it. I meant it. Then my mother spoke. She said she knew things had not been fair. She said the word fair the way people say it, when they are acknowledging the shape of something they are not fully ready to look at directly. She said she appreciated everything I had done for the business. She said she hoped I would consider coming back in some capacity, even part-time, because they valued my expertise and wanted to find a way to formalize it. That word, formalize, was the hinge the whole dinner had been built around. I understood then what the short rib was really for. I asked my mother what formalizing it would mean. She looked at my father. He said they had talked about it, and that they wanted to put me on retainer, a real one, with a monthly fee. He named a number that was reasonable, not generous, but not insulting. Derek said, and I want to say that I know I didn't appreciate how much you were carrying. He said it to the table more than to me, which was honest in its own way. Derek has always been more comfortable performing sincerity than sitting inside it. But I believed he meant the content, even if the delivery was Derek. My sister Jess, who had been quiet the whole meal, reached over and put her hand on mine. She said, I'm sorry the toast was like that. That mattered more than the retainer. I did not give them an answer that night. I told them I would think about it. I told them honestly that I needed to know the engagement was real and not a crisis response, that what I had done for 4 years could not be the baseline expectation going forward, and that if I came back to managing their finances, it would be as a professional with a contract, not as a daughter with a responsibility. My father nodded. My mother looked slightly like she had expected something easier, but she nodded too. I drove home in the quiet and thought about what I actually wanted. I thought about the restaurant itself, the old tin ceiling, and the way the kitchen sounded on a busy Friday, and the fact that 19 years of my family's life lived inside those walls. I thought about Jess and the engagement dinner, and the fact that she had squeezed my hand. I thought about my father saying illuminating, which was not the word of a man who understood what had happened, but it was the word of a man trying. I thought about what Rachel had said before I walked in. You don't owe them a rescue. You just owe yourself honesty. The honest thing was this. I did not want to burn the restaurant down. I never had. What I wanted was to stop being the person who kept it standing while pretending she was just passing through. I wanted my name somewhere other than the inside of a tax filing. I wanted to be introduced as the person who restructured their financials, not as the daughter who handles some paperwork. I wanted the work to be visible, The same way my father's charm was visible, and my mother's menu was visible, and Derek's handshakes were visible. Visible and valued and paid. That was not too much to want. It had only ever felt like too much because I had spent years measuring my own needs against a family that was very comfortable with what they were getting for free. 2 weeks later, I signed a retainer agreement with Callahan's table. 12 months, renewable, with a scope of work that listed every responsibility clearly, a fee that reflected my market rate, and a clause I insisted on that required my name to be listed as financial controller in any business documentation where such a role was identified. My father reviewed the contract with his attorney. His attorney apparently told him it was straightforward and standard, which it was. We signed it at the restaurant on a Wednesday morning, and my mother made coffee, and it was not warm exactly, but it was real. The audit flag was resolved. The payroll system was stabilized. I brought in a qualified bookkeeper to support Sandra and spent 2 sessions training her on the reconciliation process so that the system was no longer dependent on a single person who could leave at any time. That had been a structural problem long before I left, and fixing it was part of doing the job correctly. Derek and I reached a functional equilibrium. He stopped texting me things I had already documented and started reading the documentation first, which reduced our communications by about 70% and improved both of our lives considerably. He also started asking me actual questions occasionally, which I preferred to the assumption that answers would simply appear. At my sister's engagement party, 3 months later, my father gave a toast to the couple and then added, unprompted, that the restaurant's continued success was a team effort and that Maya's financial work had been foundational to where they were today. He said it naturally, without ceremony, the way you say something when it is simply true. I was standing near the kitchen door when he said it. Rachel caught my eye from across the room. I looked away before I did something embarrassing, like cry in front of 20 people at a party that was not about me. I did not cry, but I let myself feel it. That small, expensive thing I had wanted for 4 years, which was just to have someone in my family say my name and mean it. The strangest part about all of it is that nothing dramatic happened. There was no explosion, no ultimatum, no scene that would make a satisfying television moment. I did not send a letter. I did not confront anyone in a parking lot. I did not post anything. I built a 43-page document, sent 1 professional email, completed the work I had already started, and stopped doing the rest. That was it. That was all of it. And it was enough. Because the truth is, families like mine do not change because someone raises their voice. They change when the cost of not changing becomes more concrete than the comfort of staying the same. I did not make them uncomfortable. I made them responsible. There is a meaningful difference, and it matters, because one of those things is revenge, and the other one is just the truth, finally allowed to take up the space it was always owed. I still drive past the restaurant sometimes, and think about the 19 years inside those walls. I think about my parents' hands and all the things they built that were genuinely worth building. I think about Jess and her toast. That wasn't, and her hand on mine at the dinner table. I think about my father reading a 43-page transition document and learning, for the first time, the shape of what I had been doing quietly in the background of his life. Illuminating, he had called it. I suppose it was. Some lights take a long time to turn on, but when they do, everyone in the room can finally see clearly. And sometimes, that is the only thing that ever needed to happen. Thank you for listening to this. The behavior in this story is worth naming clearly. Being invisible in your own family is not humility. It is a system, often built slowly and accepted gradually, that allows some people to take credit for outcomes they did not create, while the person who created them learns to call that love. What Maya did was not dramatic. It was accurate. She stopped absorbing a cost that was never hers to carry and let reality arrive on its own schedule. The lesson is not about revenge. It is about the difference between being needed and being valued, and why you deserve to know which one you actually are.